you write a journal entry, whether, 5, 10 years, 15 years, whatever your goal may be, right? Let's say it's, selling your company. You write a journal entry, envisioning what that exactly feels like. But then from that point, you actually work your way backwards and you identify what are the key milestones that are going to actually get you to that point. And again, don't just think about the positives, but also think about the negatives. Think about the risks. Think about the challenges and the hardships that you had to go through in order to reach that point.
Welcome to the Nouveau podcast, the podcast that models healthy communication for men, empowering them to start the journey of self-work. Now here's your host, Thomas Pierce.
Welcome everybody to this week's episode of the Nouveau podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Pierce, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here with you. My guest this week is David Lee. David is an investment banking professional who recently launched a Soju craft cocktail brand. Soju is a distilled Korean alcohol, and David's business brings it to a wider Western market in a way that's really interesting, and we go pretty deep on the brand story, brand identity, and how he went about starting the business. We actually went to the same high school, although at different times, and we didn't know each other, and there's plenty of banter and insights as well. David's a really thoughtful and, insightful person, which I was really pleased to discover as we talked. So big thank you to David. Check out drinkhummy.com to see his new Soju craft cocktail business, and kick back, relax, and enjoy another week's episode of the Nouveau podcast. And we're off to the races. David, what's up, you legend?
Nothing much. How's it going, Thomas?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to talk to you. So for the folks listening, David and I don't really know each other until this whole adventure, but I just, you popped up on my LinkedIn because we both went to St. Joe's Prep in Philly, and I was like, this guy looks really interesting. I'm gonna cold message him.
Always love those inbounds.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we just start off by a little introduction? Who is David, and what's going on in your life at this point, man?
Sure. So my name is David Lee. I was born in Mississippi down in the South and decided to move over to South New Jersey, where I spent most of my childhood. Like you mentioned, went to St. Joe's Prep, Philadelphia, went to the same high school, had a great time there. And then for my undergrad, I attended NYU, where I studied finance and international business. Wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do with my life at that point. But the quote unquote safe path was just going into finance and trying to make as much money as you could. So, decided to take a career in investment banking, which, I thought I was always just going to do that for a couple of years and maybe find the next venture. But, ended up doing that for actually close to a decade. And during my time in investment banking, I worked with a lot of international clients doing cross-border M&A deals, and that really excited me. It wasn't even actually the finance aspect, but I think the international business component was something that really got me going. So, after about a decade of doing that, I felt like I wanted some type of change, and I knew that I had always wanted to try becoming an entrepreneur. And so, at the end of 2019, I decided to take that leap. Quit my job. My wife and I, we were actually going to both move out to Vietnam to kind of, pursue an international business. But unfortunately, my business idea happened to be in the hospitality industry, which, end of 2019, beginning of 2020 was not a great time to try starting something in hospitality. But, so COVID quickly changed plans. We didn't even make it all the way into Vietnam. And we had to suddenly figure out what we want to do. So we came back to the US. I was, without a job, trying to figure out what the next step was going to be. And by pure coincidence, I had actually started researching the cannabis industry. It was actually because my mother, she's suffered from rheumatoid arthritis for several years. And, I was helping her to look into alternative treatments. And I realized that
heard that one before.
no primary research. No. But it was, the funny part is like, I guess, coming from the finance side of things and, looking at the business aspect, I actually quickly realized how much of the business aspect I actually enjoyed about it. And it's not something that you hear very often when it comes to regulated industries, right? But I actually like that challenge of looking into the rules and seeing how these businesses can operate within those confines.
Yeah.
And so figured, found a new passion, and, that kind of that rolled into one thing and the next, and eventually decided to start a completely different venture in the alcohol industry with my best friend, Chris. And that's what I'm doing right now. I've been full-time on this new venture for the past 3 months. We just launched earlier this month. The product is called Hummy, Hummy, as in hummingbird. And it's been a great journey. So.
Awesome, man. Great introduction. So that's interesting what you said about regulated industries. So you're basically saying that you're sadistic in some sense of diving into the rule book.
It's funny because my wife, she actually when she first graduated from college, she wanted to become a lawyer. She even worked at a law firm, but she always tells me now, and she decided to switch careers. She's not doing anything related to law currently, but she's always told me that she feels like I actually would have enjoyed being a lawyer, which I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or not. But
yeah, that's cool. We have a new product that my company's launching, the company I work at, and I got a lot of interface recently with one of the executive directors who's kind of set up the whole approach to market and regulatory research and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's a lawyer, so I think that makes sense as far as understanding and playing the game. And like the impression I picked up from him actually was that so much of this stuff is not even talent based or necessarily intelligence. It's just like reading and thinking about it and finding solutions, so
exactly.
Yeah, is that you just seem to be resonating?
No, yeah, that's absolutely correct. You have to have a ton of patience, because you'll keep running into roadblocks. You want to do one thing and you find out it's not that easy. So you have to kind of figure out a different avenue to get there. But I think if you really go in with that solution-oriented mindset, quote unquote, then it can be incredibly rewarding. And I think when I look back now in my career, one thing that I kind of noticed was that even when I first started my first job, I actually started in the world of bankruptcy. And in bankruptcy, you're governed by the bankruptcy code, and that's has its own complete set of rules. And so there seems to be a little bit of a trend that I didn't realize until I look back, right? But I think I do enjoy kind of working within those rules and boundaries and trying to figure out what the best way to achieve a solution is.
Yeah, for sure. So what kind of things are you running into now with Hummy? And it's also a Soju Seltzer, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's actually, that in of itself has created a unique challenge for us, because we're a little bit different from your traditional hard seltzers, where we're using this this component Soju, which is a Korean distilled liquor for those who aren't familiar with it. And so that actually classifies us more along the lines of a spirit, as opposed to a beer or wine, which, a lot of the other hard seltzer products that you see on the market, they're actually classified as a beer because of the way that they're made. And so because of that product classification, you have to figure out a completely different way to distribute your product. Certain restaurants, certain stores, they won't be able to hold, hard liquor, even though they might be able to, sell beer and wine. So it definitely creates a unique set of challenges. And sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating when you just you keep running into the rules, and you're just trying to like break through that wall. But you sometimes have to just figure out, different ways around it.
Mm-hmm. So you had this idea, something about the Soju struck you, and was it more of a like an emotional connection to the product, or was it hey, this market actually doesn't have a seltzer that's more of a liquor rather than a beer? What was it about kind of this specifically that made you think, okay, this is a good market to enter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when my business partner Chris and I, when we started this venture, it was late last year, and past few years, hard seltzers had become incredibly popular. In some ways, it has become a little bit of a saturated market for sure. But one thing that we had noticed is there was very few products out there that were really targeting the kind of Asian American market. And I say this because, correction on that. So there were a few brands that were popping up that were targeting kind of Asian American flavors, but they were still approaching it from that typical hard seltzer angle.
Mm-hmm.
We felt like there was a significant opportunity by using this Korean alcohol soju, because many people don't know this, but soju is actually the number one most popular alcohol in the world by volume.
Wow.
It beats out vodka and all your other traditional liquors. Part of the reason for that is because it tends to be a little bit diluted. So it comes out closer to like a 15-20% ABV as opposed to something, harder hitting. But in any case, it is an incredibly popular liquor. But it seems to be primarily known only within Korean or Asian circles. And so we thought that there was a great opportunity to kind of bring this product to the quote unquote masses, right? In a more familiar format. So that, whether it's your Asian American audience or your Western American audience, they'll be able to enjoy this. And I think if you take a look at what's happened with sake and the rise of Japanese cuisine over the past couple of decades, I think we're definitely going to be seeing a similar type of trend going on in Korean cuisine as well as in Korean beverages.
For sure. And I think there's more of an appetite for international cuisine, right? In the United States, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like the potentially an equivalent of what Starbucks did for coffee culture, in kind of just upgrading the quality a little bit and bringing it to the masses and showing people that, hey, that actually you can get much better than pre-ground canned coffee, And,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a completely different type of product that compared to what's out on the market. It's much more of I would describe it as it has much more of a cocktail feel because we use real fruit juice in our product, a high percentage of fruit juice, along with that, and so you're getting a lot of real, truly natural flavors as opposed to kind of other seltzers where there's an alcohol component, but the flavor is all coming from kind of just artificial or flavor components that are being added.
For sure. Okay, so let's say you have this idea and you are like, I'm not seeing many or any soju seltzers. Is it as simple as like Googling all day to look for other competitors, or how does a competitive analysis start?
Yeah, so competition's a very very important, but sometimes I think a slightly overplayed component when you're thinking about starting a business. And it all depends on kind of what your angle is and whether you have something that's going to truly differentiate yourself. When we first started thinking about this venture, there were no other soju seltzers or similar type of products using soju out in the market. But the one thing that we always said was, if there's none today, there will be tomorrow. And that's the way that we've always operated, right? You don't want the special sauce to simply be the fact that you have a product where there is none. I think the special sauce really needs to be something more than that, where you feel like your product is truly differentiated, apart from just, what it has inside, but like what it stands for, right? Brand story is a very critical component, especially in consumer products. And what kind of value are you adding to the consumer? I think if you really approach it from that consumer mentality first, right? I think it's Amazon and Jeff Bezos has always said, like, rather than focusing on your competitors, focus on the consumer. And I think that that's a really important thing. So I'm glad that we stuck to that mantra from the start, because there was no other competitor in the beginning of this venture, but over the past couple of months, there have been. And to be very honest with you, like although competition can always be scary, in our view, that's actually a great thing for our industry, or rather for our sub-industry, given that soju and the Asian American alcohol market is still quite small. So the more players that there are, the better for us, right? White Claw has become wildly successful because of Truly and vice versa. And because of those two guys and other competitors, the entire hard seltzer market has been able to grow. And we're hoping to see the same thing in Asian American alcohol as well.
Totally. I wonder, will it just be like the Korean diaspora, if you will, or the Korean generational movements throughout the world as far as like heritage, or will it be other, types of Asian identities that identify with it,
We hope that it's going to resonate well beyond just the Asian American audience. And I think you can see similar type of trends going on in K-pop. Korean pop is wildly popular nowadays with the likes of like BTS and Blackpink. Even Korean film and TV shows. Squid Game obviously was a recent phenomena. I think at the end of the day, people are just attracted to great stories, right? They don't necessarily care whether it is their own culture or something that they can identify with. People can just identify with a great story. And at the end of the day, like the product that we created, we wanted it to be something that we really enjoyed and something that would stand on itself, and something that consumers would enjoy, not just because it's Korean and a taste that's familiar with them, but just because it tastes freaking awesome.
Because quality, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's interesting too to think about the brand story, because that's something that, like, I don't know. It took me a conscious effort to really wrap my head around that, and the idea that, like, I understood from a certain age that this, like, I always say that, like, we're not like bred or like ingrained to be patriotic in this country. We're trained to be consumers, and like I feel like that's the first identity is like you are a consumer, and this is everything we're gonna do is like go to school so you can get a job so you can buy shit. And so thinking about those like brand relationships, right? Like this microphone I'm using right now, it was highly recommended. I bought it. I use it now. I like it. But the people behind this microphone have put countless thousands of hours into thinking about how I'm going to subconsciously interact with their brand.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely.
But it goes on all around us.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a little bit of it's almost like a field of psychology when you think about kind of like marketing and branding, for sure. I think so I'll have to admit that I got a ton of help from my amazing wife, who is a brand strategist herself. And so she was great when we had to develop the brand story. But I think, to your point, at the end of the day, like, we're all consumers, right? And if you really think about what it is that makes you enjoy the products that you do, right? I mean, obviously we're all attracted to products that work or taste great. But sometimes there's something a little bit more, right? Why do you choose, the can of Coca-Cola versus the can of generic cola, at the supermarket, right? And I think if you really take a little bit more of a creative lens, right, and try to think about, okay, you have your product, but what is the story that you want your company and your brand to stand for? And hopefully there's going to be people out there that it resonates with. I mean, I think one thing that you have to always remember is when you're going out there, you can't please every single person. And this is obviously an approach that I think is also helpful for life in general, but you can't please 100% of the people. But I think if you develop something that you're just passionate about, something that you love for yourself, there's a pretty damn good chance that someone else out there loves it as well. And I think if you just go in with that type of mentality and feel like you're doing the best that you can, then that's what's most important.
For sure. Because people, I mean, we all I think somehow on a deep level want that excitement. It's like, oh, like David's all stoked on this Hummy. I got to try it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like, now I want
exactly.
to try it. Absolutely. Like, when is it getting up to the bay?
I don't know. Hopefully soon. Hopefully in the next few months. But again, that's another thing with these regulated industries. You have to get a different license for every single state that you're going into. But fingers crossed. Hopefully in the next couple months, we're going to be on the West Coast as well. So,
dude, if you need a rep to go cold sell liquor stores up here,
for sure, get some advertising on the podcast. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so sourcing. Talk to me about sourcing. So I would imagine with these ingredients, say like the fresh juice, you could go something that's like super processed and maybe comes in a package of some goop that you feed through a pressure machine or however it gets into the final product. How did you evaluate what ingredients to use to make the beverage?
Yeah. So first we identify the type of flavors that we're going for, right? We certainly want to identify flavors that weren't out there in the market that were a little bit unique, and would resonate with that kind of, that Asian American angle that we were speaking about earlier. So the three flavors that we have are Asian pear, honey melon, and white peach. And once we were able to kind of identify, okay, here are the flavors that we wanted, then, we worked very hard with our partners to find a good supplier, that would bring in quality ingredients, without, as you can imagine, the supply chain issues this past year have been an absolute nightmare. So that adds a whole nother logistical challenge. But making sure that you have a stable supply, reliable supply, and one that's of quality. And that sounds much easier than you would think. I mean, just to give you one example, for one of our flavors, literally once we finalized the formulation and we were about to move to our production run, we reached out to the vendor to place the order, and it turned out they couldn't supply it anymore. They didn't give any good reason. They just said that for whatever reason, they simply couldn't supply that ingredient to us.
Jeez.
So that forced us to reformulate again completely. It was almost like we're starting from scratch. And then we had to go through the entire refiling process with the regulatory agencies once we had a new formulation and everything. So, yeah, it's that's the reason why, like, again, patience in this industry is absolute key. But that was definitely a big hurdle. But once you figure out those challenges, then it's great. You get to work with some very quality suppliers and vendors, and so hopefully it's a lot more smooth sailing from here on out.
Is it one of those things where you have to kind of earn the supplier's trust and like make a reputation in a way, or are they kind of more like, all right, like get in line, we'll send you the goods?
That's a great question. It kind of depends. I mean, each vendor is a little bit different. So one of our vendors, they're pretty large, pretty large fruit vendor. And so, as a starting brand, we're pretty small customer for them. But at the same time, they, for anyone who's been in this industry for long enough, like, you never know who's going to be a hit and who's going to kind of fade away, right? It is, like I said, a very saturated competitive market. So there are a lot of brands that come up and then kind of fizzle out. But I think because there's always that possibility that someone's going to make it big and kind of get to that next level. We haven't had too many problems with that. So
nice. So as far as to like the whole crux of this was like you identified that there was a market not being served, or these flavors hadn't really been introduced to the wider US market. And that's a bit of vision, right? That takes some kind of foresight or sensing an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a common theme that all entrepreneurs have, or successful entrepreneurs have. So is that something that you and your partner kind of consciously cultivated, or does that come naturally? Is that something that can be taught?
So, as I mentioned before, I knew that I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't necessarily have a specific idea throughout all these years, right? It's it's the approach I always take was, yes, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I want to be going after it because, I have a great idea or product, not trying to chase being an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur. So I think that's when you start kind of running into some problems. People sometimes get a little egotistical. They want to have that CEO title and the glitz and the glamour. But for me, I think it was a lot more important to be passionate about whatever it was that I was going to be working on, and to truly love the product. When it came to the Soju Seltzer idea, I mean, I think even with my last venture, the hospitality venture, there's a lot of times where, business ideas will kind of flow into your mind. But I have found that I am both an incredible optimist as well as a pessimist. And I think sometimes that can actually be a very helpful balance, because you want to be enough of an optimist to have that vision and to see all the potential benefits in the upside and to chase after those goals. But you also need to have that quote unquote pessimist, or, that very practical side where you're kind of seeing, okay, how can I actually get there? And I think one of the frameworks that has been very beneficial for me is, it's a sort of a visualization exercise where you identify what the goal is that you want to achieve. But rather than just kind of thinking about all the upsides, you get very, very specific and start thinking in detail about what that would look like. So, I mean, one way of doing it that I found to be helpful was you write a journal entry, whether, 5, 10 years, 15 years, whatever your goal may be, right? Let's say it's, selling your company. You write a journal entry envisioning what that exactly feels like. But then from that point, you actually work your way backwards and you identify what are the key milestones that are going to actually get you to that point. And again, don't just think about the positives, but also think about the negatives. Think about the risks. Think about the challenges and the hardships that you had to go through in order to reach that point. That's something that's been very helpful for me because, I think it a lot of times when you just think about the positives and everything that could go well, when you're faced with those challenges, then it can be very disheartening. But I think if you kind of ready it in your mind a little bit, and you keep both the end goal as well as the kind of near-term journey in mind, then it makes it a much easier process.
Nice. Well said, man. God, that was beautiful. I love that. Yeah, for sure. Like one of my goals that I'm just popped up in my mind today is that, maybe 5-10 years from now, I want to have a dope podcast studio, whether it's separate from where I live or attached to my house or whatever. And I just have the most interesting, successful, fucking inspiring people come by the crib all week, and we just have awesome conversations. So I love that exercise to work backwards. And yeah, that's great, man. Along your career journey too, when we talked previously, you had shared that, wasn't always this like smooth sailing. Of course, everyone has ups and downs, and there was a time when you were let go from a job and
absolutely
kind of experienced a toxic culture and things around that didn't align with you. So what was that experience like? And are there any kind of, what kind of insights did you gain from that whole experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a really important lesson for me very early on in my career. So my first job out of college, I joined one of the largest investment banks in the world. It was, your typical, very reputable, impressive job, and
mucky mucks.
I went to NYU, where the tuition was very expensive. So, you can say that it was a desirable outcome after all that. But, it was actually a job that I was actually very passionate about. It was something that I had set as a goal for myself. Something that, that particular firm, I really want to work there. And it was to the point where like I had read biographies about the CEO. I had read about the history of the investment bank, really, really just getting passionate about it. And I won't go into all the details, but less than a year into that job, I was let go for. It was a little bit of a bizarre reason, but I was kind of scapegoated for a situation that was somewhat out of my control, and that was a huge shock to be fired. Less than a year of working, and it was definitely a wake up call. I had to figure out what it was that I wanted to do, and had to ask a lot of tough questions about myself. I think one of the real important lessons from that whole experience was just learning at a very early age that I am not my career. And I think that is something that a lot of people forget about in this day and age. A lot of times when, I don't know about here on the West Coast, but like on the East Coast, like in New York City, when you're meeting new people, one of the first questions people ask is, what do you do?
What do you do?
Right. It's such a strong part of our identity.
Yeah.
And for any person who has ever been temporarily out of a job, or maybe like myself right now, where you're working on something a little bit more entrepreneurial, it's a very interesting question when you hear that, because previously you just kind of identify with the work that you do. But I think what's actually a lot more important, and what I kind of had to learn at an early age was, who I am is not necessarily just what I do, but also how I am and why I am. Right. I think that's, the motivations are something that's very important, and the values that you have. That was a very tough time in my life, to suddenly be unemployed, looking for a new job when I thought I, quote unquote, had it made. But it was also a very humbling experience, and one where once I got my next job, I developed a strong sense of confidence that, hey, if I encounter any other type of hardship like this, I'll be okay. I'll be able to find that next job, and I'll be able to keep going. And I think that is something that's been very valuable for me. So later on in my career, my most recent job, that was the one that had a very terrible toxic culture. And it was luckily something that I identified quite early on. And again, it was very nerve-wracking at any time that you decide to leave a job without something fully lined up. But because of that experience that I had early on in my career, I knew that, okay, this was not going to be the right place for me. I didn't respect my manager. I felt like it was a terrible culture. So let me just leave and figure out what the next thing is that I'm going to do, and not being too fearful of that. So I think in hindsight, like, if you asked me 21, 22-year-old David when I was unemployed, if that was an experience that I would be very grateful for, of course I would have said no way. But in hindsight, I'm very glad to have had that experience, especially early on in my career.
Nice, man. Dude, what you said about who I am is not what I am, it's how I am and
why I am.
Something else. Mm-hmm. What I am. Yeah, absolutely. That was an incredible line, man. I love that. And I agree that it is something that's hard to disassociate with our identities. I think also because of the piece about how we're American consumers, not American citizens. That's a sentiment that I really do believe, and it's something that is good to keep in mind, because that feeds into our sense of self-worth, like you said, how we relate to people. And yeah, I also was fired from my first job out of college. It wasn't something I was like super passionate about, and so I didn't have that same, I think, kind of gusto for it, but it was still very similar, right? It's like I moved out to California, shit out of luck, got super fired. Dude, I wasn't even fired. I was like tricked into quitting. So they were basically like, oh, hey, really not performing. And I was like, yeah. I know. Like, I'm grinding, man. I'm here.
Uh-huh.
I'm here 10 hours a day or whatever. Like, I'm busting my ass trying to do this job. But yeah, I totally agree. I'm not performing. And they're like, what are we going to do about that? And I was like, well, I don't. Looking back now, I'd be like, well, I'm not quitting. You can fire me
Right. Uh-huh.
if you think I'm not performing. But I quit.
Yeah.
So then I learned, okay, you're not eligible for unemployment. They just paid me whatever was remaining on that 2 weeks. But
Oh, that sucks, man.
yeah, but luckily I had enough couple G's in the bank to pay rent for that month or whatever it was, and figure it out. But yeah, man, I think for me that one was just like humble pie. That was just like my next job.
For sure.
I came in with an attitude of like, I'm here to learn. I'm gonna work my ass off, and I'm gonna provide value somehow, because I've been in sales since I graduated college, which I'm go back and forth on. But with that job, it's tough just because it's so quantitative in your performance, right? It's super transparent. And I identified early that, okay, I'm not going to always be performing, like whether it's the market, whether it's me, whether it's the product I'm selling, whatever. So I have to find another way to provide value, and I have to find another way to be kind of invaluable to the team somehow. So that's something I keep in the back of my mind too. And it's interesting as you say that, to remind myself, like, keep humility, keep that mindset of like, nothing is given to us, right? We have to earn it.
100%. No, it was a great lesson for me too, because once it was funny after that experience, because don't get me wrong, it could be a pretty traumatic experience, especially that early on in your career. But every single job that I've had since then, right? I think I don't want to. There's a degree to which this is healthy, but I think operating with a certain degree of paranoia, right? Like as if you have a target on your back, right? I do think that can be a great motivator, and I think maybe the healthier way of putting that is, to your point, you can't take anything for granted. And I think sometimes when we take jobs, especially jobs that we don't particularly like or passionate about, and by the way, that's totally fine. You don't have to always be in a job like every step of the way in your career and feel like you're in love with it. There's always it's a process, right? I think if you always approach it from with the mentality of, okay, this is a journey. Maybe this isn't the right job for me, but this will help me find the next thing, right? I think regardless, it's still important to do as good of a job as you can, no matter where you are. And I think that was a good lesson for me, to remember to that quote unquote the only the paranoid survive, right? And to not take my job for granted, to keep busting my ass off, and to keep going after it every single day.
For sure, man. Absolutely. And yeah, I love that attitude, man. And it's a good one to keep front and center, because it is easy to get complacent. You do something for a few years or even a few months and get like, okay, like my team likes me, or okay, like I had a couple wins and so now I'm good.
Right.
But it's like, what are the goals, right? Because for some people, work is just a means to pay the bills, and they don't find inspiration or deep value from it. But I don't know, I guess I'm kind of negotiating that in my own head, because I don't know, I'm a passionate person. I want to, that's what I'm seeking, like you said, like the journey, right? Like finding the right like thing that is inspirational and motivational. But
it's tough, and every single person is going to have a different approach, right? There's some people who will show up to their 9 to 5, and maybe it's not something that they're super passionate about, but as long as it pays the bills, then they find their happiness in other ways, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's certainly no right answer here in life, right? So I think as long as whatever approach you're taking, you feel like you're owning it, right? If if it's, hey, this is not the right job for me, but this is going to get me to that next step, then just cement that type of mentality in your mind, because it will feel like you're really in the driver's seat of that decision, as opposed to feeling like you're a victim of things that are going on outside of you.
I love that, man. Dude, you're a wise ass man, David. Goddamn. I love that, dude.
I try.
That's what's up, man. So what about that? Like, because my program is a lot of self-improvement, self-reflection kind of ideas and concepts. So what are the things that you do, I would say, when you think about self-improvement, whether it be work, relationship?
Absolutely.
All of the above.
Yeah, it's something that I think, especially since COVID and then these lockdowns, something that has become increasingly more and more important. So for myself, I actually, by pure coincidence, I actually started really getting into a meditation practice a few months, like right around the time that I quit my job. And this is a few months before COVID, but I'm very glad that I picked it up before COVID started, because I think without it, it would have been very difficult, especially during that period of instability where we were just, moving all around the world and wasn't sure what was going to happen next. I think it's very important for people to do something for themselves. And I know that sounds, very, very selfish, but I think it is very important to take some time out of your day to either work out, read a book, do, journal entries or a meditation practice, just some type of practice that allows you to kind of, break away from the outside world. And I think especially it's particularly important when you think about this day and age with like social media, for example, right? Where you're just constantly looking outward and looking at other people and what they're doing. And there's always this feeling of FOMO, right? Like you feel like, you're not as cool, not as good looking or whatever. And I think by doing that and by looking inward a little bit, you will naturally become a more selfless person, a more generous person, kinder person, and just developing more empathy for others. And so that's something that I would strongly encourage everyone to do. I saw that one of your earlier podcasts, you had someone from the Art of Life Foundation, and that was actually something that I actually participated recently myself.
Oh, let's go!
It's great. It was an awesome program. Yeah, awesome program.
Which retreat did you do?
It was online, but I did it a couple weeks ago. So it was pretty recent, but
yeah,
all the time.
Was it the breathwork one or the yoga one, or what was the?
Correct. It was the sky breathwork.
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had Hong Mei, who taught me in Philly, and then 2 weeks ago I had Kushal.
Nice.
His story is interesting, man. I think you would like that one, because he had a pretty similar kind of narrative. Like he was a day trader, not a day trader. He was a stock trader, and then survived 9/11 from inside the World Trade Center, and then ended up finding Art of Living. But yeah, I think that's interesting, man. So what do you think what about the journey within has the potential to be that kind of selfless motivator for people?
It's a great question. I think one of the challenges that we all face is, as we're so busy with our jobs and balancing relationships and jobs and everything else that we have going in our life, we tend to get caught up in all of it, right? And you start to form different type of narratives, and you start to develop that ego, right? I think the ego is something that's always, it's an interesting topic, but I think you have to be careful about that at times, because not to say having a little bit of ego is necessarily a bad thing, but I think when you start to view everything from your own perspective and within your own narrative, right, you start to kind of really, you forget and stop truly kind of seeing what's around you and the people around you. And I think, even when it comes to relationships, for example, right, when you start dating someone for a very long time, you start to take certain things for granted. And I think it's always a very healthy thing to take that step back and just have that refresher and just reminding yourself, okay, what are you grateful for? Who are you grateful for? Why are you grateful for those things and people? And you can't achieve that without taking a moment to pause and kind of reflecting inward a little bit. So it can be a little bit uncomfortable when you first start doing it, but I think it's a very, very healthy practice.
Agreed. Yeah, I think just it's a good perspective. Like, literally, we have to process life coming in from the only lens we have is our own. There's so much coming in that we have to filter it through the perspective of, okay, how does this thing happening affect me? Because that's just the only perspective we have. And then by kind of allowing ourselves to get away from the superficial paradigm maybe and kind of see that there is so much more than just what's this in front of us immediately.
Right.
But yeah, that's awesome, man. That's really cool. And I've been doing the sky breath like January I started. It hasn't been super consistent, but last few weeks been more consistent with it. Yeah, it's good stuff, man.
So the one that you did recently, was that also sky breath, or was that a different type of workshop?
I did the yoga one a while back, and that was cool because it was more like big Y yoga in addition to the physical yoga. So it was like the theory and kind of the meditations and the history behind yoga and kind of what that means. That was interesting. And they also have they have a silent retreat too. Yeah. I think that's more impactful in person, but yeah, that one's definitely interesting. I remember I'd met someone years ago who went on a silent meditation retreat, and I think he was actually there for, it wasn't even just a few days. I think he was actually there for a couple of weeks. And the idea of that was just like so appalling to me at the time. But I think after practicing meditation more and just kind of seeing the kind of inner peace it can bring you, I can certainly see the value in it. So totally, dude. Awesome, David. Well, we'll pivot over to the final chapter of every episode of the Nouveau podcast, the 3 Things game.
Okay.
Best game around.
Let's do it.
Okay, so what month is your birthday in?
July.
Okay, nice. So you're up first. Here is your question.
That's a very interesting question. So I can tell you the question, right?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So what are 3 things I've learned about food? So having developed my own, food and beverage product, I think one thing that's been surprising is when you kind of see the inner workings of how everything operates is, always read labels with a little bit of skepticism, because a lot of it is marketing for sure.
You're like, I know, because that's what I do.
Hey, real fruit juice, all natural. That's everything's good in our cans, but I can't say the same for everyone else. So, I'll say the role of food in kind of obviously in health, but also just kind of in your happiness is definitely a big one that I've kind of realized the past couple of years as I've tried to eat healthier. And what would be the last thing? Can't think of a good one for the last one right now. But.
Nice. 2 it is. Nice, man. Yeah, I agree. Food is super impactful, and we don't think about it. Okay, my question is, what are 3 things I've learned about love? Well, I love love. I'm a total romantic. I'm super in love with my girlfriend, which is very nice.
Awesome.
And, that's lovely. And I think that number 2 would be on a deeper level, right? Like, just turned 26. I would say, you know, I've had other relationships and I've had other like dating other people in my 20s, but this I would say is like a first like relationship I'm taking like super seriously as an adult, or more seriously in the sense of like all things we talked about, like be less selfish, be more considerate, think about how my actions impact other people. And in this instance, love has just held a mirror up to me and a lot of my strengths and weaknesses, you know, things that about myself that I, you know, she's taught me to be proud of, right? And be like, that's so cool that you can do that. That's so amazing for XYZ reason. And then also things that where I've fallen so short, right? And like hurt her and been like, oh crap, like I need to seriously like take this thing on with much more maturity and not play with this person's heart who has given it to me, you know? So all of that, number 2 would be like just how much of a mirror it is has been really interesting. And, you know, and the whole theme of this podcast, right, Bro Nouveau, is like, be better, man. And the relationship has shown me that I actually have a lot of improvement to do. And then number 3, I think there's something there with love that's like, I'll go self-love. Yeah, I'll go self-love, man. I think that's something that we are not taught in this culture, at least.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know in any cultures if it's taught. Maybe in like cultures that are more connected to like their history and like the stories from ancestors and stuff. But I don't know. I don't think there's much of an emphasis in the U.S. on like give yourself a pat in the back, you know, be proud. I think that's a great point. I think way too many people have, you know, including myself, have that inner critic that's always blaring so loudly, right? And I think just taking a moment to remind ourselves to be kinder to ourselves and then just appreciate ourselves. I think that is a very, very important lesson. So beautiful. Well, David, you're an absolute legend. Thank you so much, man. Folks, go check out drinkhummy.com for a delicious Soju Seltzer.
Hope you guys get to enjoy it and try it. So thanks a lot, Thomas. I appreciate the time and having me on your podcast. It's been great.
Yeah, likewise, man. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your time as well.